Welcome to Communities in Place Policy and Scrutiny Committee. This is a meeting to which the public may attend, however, it is not a public meeting. I'm very pleased that we have members of the public attending this evening and we'll be making statements later on. I'm Councillor Finnegan and I'll be chairing this evening's meeting. I'm supported by my Vice Chair, Councillor Jeffrey, our officers and directors and a Cabinet member. Thank you for attending this evening's meeting. We are not expecting a fire drill, but if you hear an alarm, please make your way to the nearest fire exits located at the rear of the chamber and then to the central point outside the Lynn Cross pub. May I also remind everybody in the chamber to please switch off your mobile phones or turn to silent mode, and I'm just wondering whether I've done that myself, so I'm going to check in a second. If members of the committee or other councillors wish to speak, could you clearly raise your arm? I don't want to miss anybody, so please keep your arm up trying to get my attention. And please remember to turn the microphone on when you wish to speak and off when you have finished. I think it'll be useful to introduce everybody this evening, so can I please start with members on my right, please?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Barbara Childs. I'm the Director of Place.
I'm Catherine Howe, Head of Strategic Planning.
I'm Tal Kleiman, Principal Planning Officer.
Matt Bates, Planning Policy Team Leader.
Judy Carboni, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you very much. So item number one this evening is apologies for absence. I know we've got Councillor Beard and Councillor Fisher. Councillor Utan's made it. Thank you very much. Do we have any other apologies of absence?
We do. We have apologies from Councillor Sam Bateman, apologies from Councillor Kasha Greenwood and from Councillor Dennis Livingstone.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Grant. Item number 2 is minutes. So thank you, Judy, for producing the minutes. May I just remind members, if you wish to propose amendment, this should be done in writing at least 24 hours in advance of the meeting. Have we received any comments on the minutes? Thank you. Any comments this evening? Thank you. I'm happy that's an accurate reflection of the meeting held on the 11th of June. And are we all in agreement? Thank you very much. Item number 3 is actions from the last meeting. Councillors were to review the community asset transfer policy. I'm pleased that councillors from the group have provided comments and that the final report is with the Director of Resources and Legal for signature, and then it be passed on to the relevant Cabinet member, Councillor Taylor, for final approval. Hopefully that will be done by the end of the week. The Best Safety Task and Finish Group, as resolved at our last meeting, a copy of the report and recommendations has been sent to West Sussex Fire and Rescue. Item number 4 is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest from members of the committee? Take it as no. Thank you very much. Announcements from the Chair or Chief Executive. Item number 5. There are no. Judy, is there anything else from Chief Exec? No, so no meeting tonight. Item 6, resolutions of call-in. There are none of those either. Thank you. Item number 7, responses of the full Council or Cabinet. There are none, so thank you. Item number 8, Horsham District Local Plan Examination Next Steps. This is on page 11 to 62 of your pack. The order for this agenda item tonight will be as follows. I'll introduce the item. We will then receive a draft report from the Strategic Head of Planning and the team. I will then ask members of the public to deliver their statements. We will then discuss. Members of the committee will be able to raise questions and then open it up to non-members in attendance. So just a quick introduction. July 24, HDC submitted its Emerging Horsham District Local Plan, HDLP, to the Planning Inspector. Hearings were arranged for mid-December 24, but after 3 days of hearings, the Inspector cancelled further hearings with reference to legal compliance and soundness of the plan. April the 7th this year, Council received the inspector's interim findings letter. As you'll know, the letter referenced duty to cooperate, water neutrality schemes and other soundness concerns. The Council strongly disagrees with the inspector's reasoning and conclusions. The Council have explored other options such as judicial review. However, the Council feels that it's in the best interest of the district to withdraw the local plan from examination. On page 11 of your pack, you will see the full recommendations to Cabinet. I'm going to hand over to Catherine Howe, Head of Strategic Planning, and her team, Tao and Matt, to present the draft report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So what we have is a presentation which talks you through the report. Tal, if you wouldn't mind just going to the first page. We're just doing this just by way of introduction. There will be 4 of us speaking. I'll hand over to Barbara shortly just to sort of introduce the topic. And then there will be a presentation from Matt Bates, then Tal Kleiman, and then myself in terms of some of the next steps. But I'll pass over to Barbara to begin with.
Thank you, Catherine. So the a summary of what we'll be covering is on the slide here. We'd be grateful if you could let us go through the presentation. We'll try and rattle through it so that if we could get through and then answer any questions or what have you afterwards. But essentially, we wanted to talk to you about the local plan, where we are, what the next steps are, before we then talk to you about the potential for an additional policy advice note and where we are in terms of timelines. Very conscious that members have been very concerned about the process. And really, I think something that I can say, which the members of the team probably can't, is how difficult this has been from a professional officer perspective, having the plan scrutinised in this way and the conclusions which we fundamentally disagree with. And the recommendations that are before you in the context of the draft Cabinet report have not been done lightly. They've been very considered. We've taken our time over this, and you know, we think on balance withdrawing the plan would be the right thing to do for the community and for the district as a whole, and we'll explain our reasoning as we go through the presentation. Having said that, there may well be an opportunity for one last letter to the Planning Inspectorate, just to see whether there is any chance at all of them reconsidering their position. But if the response to that is no, then our recommendations to you will be clear from the Cabinet, your reading of the Cabinet report, the draft report, and through the presentation. So I can cover that a bit later, perhaps in questions, but I'll hand over to Catherine to talk us through where we are with the local plan and a bit of a recap and the challenge to the decision.
It's Matt next, so I'll pass over to Matt.
Hi, well, thank you.
Apologies, Matt.
No worries, no worries. Good afternoon, Matt Bates, Planning Policy Team Leader. So I'm just going to kick off a sort of 3-part presentation running through essentially our thought process that we and our proposed actions since we received that initial findings, interim findings letter from the inspector. So if we can maybe go to the first slide for my bit. I think the chair has quite neatly summed up what's on this slide, so I don't propose to kind of go through that again. So clearly that's just the dates, the key dates, the key things that have happened. So if we maybe go to the slide following that. This just summarises what the inspector said in his interim findings letter, which was received on the, we received on the 7th of April, actually. It's dated the 4th of April, 2025. So 4 main key points to consider really is that, firstly, the Inspector Luke Fleming considered that the duty to cooperate test, which is a legal test as set out in the regulations, and indeed the Act was not considered to be met. The Inspector reasoned that alternative sites and solutions to deliver water neutrality were not sufficiently discussed with the duty to cooperate partners between January and July 2024, quite a specific time period. And then the reasons in more detail for that are summarised in the next bullet probably. So the Inspector was unclear whether the snow, what we referred to at the time as the SNOWS scheme, the name has now changed, but that's the Cross Authority Water Offsetting Scheme that we've been set up over the last few years, whether that scheme would be any more reliable in enabling development than a private water neutrality scheme. So essentially, the Inspector considered there were representations made very forcefully by site promoters, obviously who were not strategic site promoters, whose sites were not being allocated in the local plan. Their arguments that I think were clearly quite successful because the Inspector has challenged us in his letter as to why the council did not discuss in more detail, we discussed these matters, but discuss in more detail and record the outcome of conversations with for example, our neighbouring local authorities, which is generally what we mean by the duty to cooperate partners. Those privately provided schemes he considered may have helped the council to find more housing in the local to allocate in the local plan by way of possibly an additional strategic site coming forward. Obviously there's more detail in the report. He also outlined that he had significant soundness concerns on other matters, but the letter does not go into detail on these matters. And he recommended that the local plan be withdrawn and the council then rapidly prepare a new local plan utilising much of the good and comprehensive work already undertaken before the evidence base that we had prepared over a number of years, significant cost and effort. So before that evidence base became out of date, so essentially building again on the existing evidence base is what we took from that. Next slide. So then obviously the one that, the absolute sort of top question that has been posed to the council is, can we challenge this decision? The options on this front are, well, yes, we can. So we could receive the inspector's final report, and then we would go to the courts to request a judicial review. Or we could do what the inspector was recommending to us and formally withdraw the plan and begin preparation of a new plan. So in terms of the inspector's final report, so we would need to receive that for a legal challenge to take place. That is quite clear. And what that would mean is that we would have to pay the inspectorate further money, which would be additional cost to pay for the preparation of the inspector's full and final report. Also, the other thing to be aware of is that had we taken that action, then the inspector's detailed views on soundness matters would be set out in full, most likely. That would be a public report, and we fear that it would significantly undermine the effectiveness of the existing adopted local plan, the HDPF, and compromise the council's ability to resist inappropriate development. That's clearly a concern. Essentially, we have a spatial strategy set out in our adopted plan. We had reason to believe from the comments made by the inspector at the hearings that he was not happy with the spatial strategy in the emerging plan, which essentially mirrored that in the adopted plan, if that makes sense. Hopefully better explained in the report itself. So if we go to the next slide. In terms of obviously the report sets out the risks of going down the option of the judicial review, so the legal challenge. What we understand to be the case is the inspector's conclusions are a matter of judgment, and courts do not rule on this element, which effectively means that it is very unusual essentially to have a court agree that an inspector in a case like this has erred in their judgment on the matters being considered. It's much more likely that it would have to be a procedural issue which was, being challenged. So that and we don't see there is any substantive procedural issues. Also, if we went down this road, there would be very substantial legal and court fees, as one might expect. It would need significant input from the council's legal and strategic planning teams. That we consider may impact delivery of other corporate projects. Clearly a big distraction for the council as a whole, taking us away from other perhaps more productive work. We understand it would take at least 12 to 18 months, this process of a legal challenge. That would delay the resumption of proactive planning and place shaping and prolong the uncertainty that we're currently facing, and there would we think it would increase the risk of speculative development given the lack of clarity and uncertainty over where we were going. So in the scenario that we did challenge and the council did succeed in its legal challenge, the local plan would then continue the examination, but of course this is maybe 18 months, 2 years down the line by the time we've had the inspector's report, and the evidence would clearly be dated by that time. The water neutrality position it will most likely have changed. It may have fallen away altogether, and so in the judgment of officers, the plan would be found unsound again, and we would be no further forward. Next slide. Given all that, the recommendation that officers are making to the cabinet member and the cabinet ultimately was that the cabinet formally withdraw the local plan from examination on behalf of the council. This is the most pragmatic and constructive approach when considering the public interest. What this would mean is that the local plan no longer takes effect, and it's a controlled choice. So we're rejecting the delay and uncertainty of a legal challenge would bring. We're avoiding wasting public money. It also takes away any uncertainty in terms of the status of the adopted HDPF. We'll also hear in a moment from Tal about the draft planning advice note supporting the HDPF, and obviously there's neighbour plans to consider as well in that. The benefits are that it allows resources to then focus on progressing on a new local plan, which brings benefits in terms of our control on shaping growth and delivering infrastructure in a positive and controlled way. Also, bearing in mind that an emerging plan gains weight over time, that wouldn't happen quickly, but there would come a point in its progress where we could actually start giving the plan material weight. That would be at an earlier point in time than if we waited for a judicial review to play out, etc., etc. So we think overall it paves the way for positive planning and a stronger defence against unwanted speculative development. And I think that might be the last. Have I got another one? No. Next slide. Yeah, so now I'll pass to my colleague Tal.
Thanks, Matt, and good evening, members. As Matt just previewed, I'm going to talk about the shaping development in Horsham District Planning Advice Note, which, if you know anything about planners, will get shortened to an acronym, probably SD-PAN. Talking about acronyms, we had what was known as a facilitating appropriate development document, known as the FAD. That was endorsed by full council in October 2022. We think it needs to be updated and replaced to account for the changing circumstances that have been discussed before. So it will be called the Shaping Development Plan Advice Note to probably more accurately reflect what the document does. It's a non-statutory guidance document, so it's not a formal part of the development plan, so therefore it's unlikely to be determinative in its own right. However, it will be an important aid for decision makers, applicants, yourself, other stakeholders, as it signposts and identifies the current policies of importance, and also where more information can be found on a range of different subjects, including the evidence-based documents, which, as Matt highlighted, may still carry forward in decision making. As well as being an aid, I think it does highlight that we are a proactive council, and we still want to use the planning system to encourage positive outcomes. We want to shape development rather than allow development to sort of shape itself without sort of our involvement. And I will just note that it has, or the FAD has been referenced in appeals in a positive way to support reasons for refusals and decisions the council have made. From a professional level, it's also quite important in that it gives consistent advice on various different matters that the planning system covers to the decision makers and applicants. So we'll use it often in our discussions with development management colleagues. The draft document is appended to the report. I think it's Appendix 2. But in short, the content is an introduction, which gives sort of the context that we're in with regards to the HDPF being our development plan, our local plan proposed to be withdrawn, and our housing land supply position being around 1 year, so below what the government expect us to display. It explains the tilted balance, which I think I've given presentations on before, and will highlight that no weight should be given to the local plan if withdrawn, but that our evidence base, is sort of, to reiterate Matt's point, can still help justify decisions. The third chapter discusses neighbourhood planning, so it identifies how made and emerging neighbourhood plans should be used in decision making. They still hold weight. They will be useful where they exist in the determination of plan applications. 4 discusses our favourite topic of the moment, water neutrality, but instead of sort of explaining huge details about water neutrality, signpost to where the most relevant information can be found to ensure that it is kept up to date, because we acknowledge that things, as Matt mentioned before, can change. Section 5, or Chapter 5, is probably the most substantive area. It gives advice on a range of different matters, which presumably you can see behind me, and I'll not go through every single one of them. But one thing I will highlight is the reference to site allocations proposed in the to be withdrawn local plan. So there we identify the sites, recognising that our evidence base supported development of those sites, but, and I think this is a key point, relates to sort of constraints and particular issues on those sites that we think applicants should have regard to, and so should decision makers. And that's broadly the content of the document. So I think I'm passing you forward to Catherine in our planning relay.
Thank you, Tal. Yes, so this part of the presentation is to set out, if the decision is made to withdraw, obviously we'd have the SD PAN, but also we would need to think about preparing a new local plan. So the first bit of the presentation is really some of the national context in which we would be facing. We know that there are a lot of changes nationally to planning, and key to that is the sort of a changed framework for local plan making. That we are expecting regulations for in the autumn of this year. So that's parliamentary autumn, so potentially up till Christmas. But what we do know from sort of previous consultations that have come out from government is that we would expect it to be a prescribed local plan preparation schedule of around 30 months. There would be gateway checks from the planning inspectorate along the way in order to minimise the risk of failure at the final examination. I think my slight caution on that is that we have obviously had a number of conversations with PINS as part of our local plan that's currently at examination, and that didn't necessarily identify the risk that was pulled out at examination. So I'm not sure it's a completely fail-safe approach, but nevertheless welcome that it's there. There are also proposals for national development management policies, although actually since this slide was drafted, there are some changes from government about when that might be, whether that would be sort of straight away, and a consultation to come on that in itself. There are also proposals to limit the scope of local plans to locally specific matters. Again, it's not quite clear what that might mean. There would be an inclusion of design codes in development plans, but interestingly, the duty to cooperate would be repealed and replaced with a new alignment test. And again, we don't know the detail of that, but certainly I think there is appetite from within government recognising that some of the issues that perhaps we have faced as one of them, that it isn't working as it currently is, and that needs to change. So next slide, please. There is also an expectation from government that local planning authorities prepare new local plans without delay, and obviously that's something we're minded to do and would need to do anyway. But there are a number of challenges within that, and certainly local re-government or reorganisation is one of that. And although it does say that it would allow for carrying forward of district-wide local plans and adoption by a new unitary, but obviously there are perhaps no guarantees within that that it would necessarily happen. But as Matt has already alluded to as part of his presentation, if we do go down the route of preparing a new local plan, which we need to do in the event, and it's in our local development scheme, it does enable us over time to give weight to that emerging plan, and it enables us to work towards restoring our 5-year housing land supply. And also there are opportunities for renewed public engagement as part of that process. Next slide. So I've touched on some of these. These are some of the challenges that any new local plan would face, but I think it's important that we air them here. So obviously there is considerable uncertainty in terms of the forthcoming regulations around the new plan making system. However, one thing is absolutely clear is that obviously the government has significantly increased its housing targets. Our current target is 1,338 dwellings per annum. And that is impacted as well by the need for, because of water neutrality, we haven't met targets for a number of years previously. So we are required to put in place a 20% buffer for the first 5 years of the plan. We know that any new neighbourhood plans that come forward also need to think about what that new housing target means for them, and would be likely to think, if they want to do allocations, which they don't absolutely have to do, they would need to think about that as well in terms of what that means for housing allocations. And that's a conversation that we've begun to have with parishes recently as part of a parish workshop held earlier this year. And I think also important to understand is actually, if we're looking at this level of growth, what on earth does that mean for infrastructure, the implications around that, and how we actually meet those targets, but something that can come forward as part of local plan preparation. Next slide. And then really this is just setting out, we know that this new housing target will apply for a number of years to come. Without a local plan, we would be looking at speculative development, which is increasingly hard to resist for ad infinitum for the future, really, and little ability to ensure that infrastructure is there and in place in the way that we need it to be to support development. So the local plan, really, in our view, and this approach is the best interest, much as it's not something where we wanted to end up in terms of having rather than a time-consuming, costly and uncertain legal challenge. So that's really the summary there. There is one final slide, I believe. A couple of more slides. So this is the one on neighbourhood planning. I won't go through the detail there, but in summary, there is a paragraph in the NPPF, a paragraph 14, which does theoretically give some protection from the presumption in favour of sustainable development where plans have allocated land for development. As I've touched on already, you know, we know that target would likely increase as part of those plan reviews, but something that's potentially quite helpful for parishes to think about. And then finally, one more slide. So this is really just a timeline of our expectations going forward. Obviously, we're discussing the report this evening. The forward plan has the programmed withdrawal for the 6th, or consideration of that on the 6th of August. If that is agreed, then obviously the process of withdrawing the plan would take place from the 7th of August onwards, and obviously various updates to the local plan. What isn't on the slide is obviously sort of subsequent programmes for local plan reviews. Obviously, that's something that, you know, subject to the decision being made, would need to be worked up. But I will stop there and obviously then pass over to Chair.
Thank you very much. That was a great report. Thank you. I'm sure you've got lots of questions following that, but what we're going to do first is go to the public speakers next. So first public speaker tonight is Paul Koniski. I hope I've said that correctly. You have 2 minutes to provide your statement. Thank you.
When our current local plan, the HDPF, first fell under presumption, also known as the tilted balance, I was a strong advocate that this did not mean its housing policies could be ignored. The NPPF is policy, not law, and so cannot change the legal status of development plan policies. Therefore, I very much welcome a comprehensively updated FAD continuing to follow that principle. I was also a strong supporter of the HDLP, a new local plan that would lock in a common sense, roughly 800 per year average housing requirement, and also significantly raise the affordable homes percentage on many greenfield sites. If adopted, this new plan would have restored our 5-year land supply, taken us out of presumption, and thereby restored plan-led development and seriously inhibited speculative development, wouldn't it? Well, actually, no, it wouldn't. The submitted HDLP failed to spot the elephant in the room, the housing delivery test, the HDT. Even if the HDLP had been adopted this year, the tilted balance would still have been engaged until sometime in 2027. So another 2 years at risk of speculative developers, just waiting for water neutrality to disappear. Even the Horsham Golf appeal for 800 homes would likely still have been allowed. This scuppering impact by the HDT on our submitted plan, and also any future new local plan, needs to be addressed clearly and properly, and with strategies outlined to avoid it. Knowing this, together with the government's blatant intent to impose draconian housing targets on our district, I do, however, conclude that the report's recommended way forward is the least worst of some very, very bad options. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's exactly 2 minutes. Thank you very much for your time. Sue Koniski, you have also 2 minutes. Thank you.
I live in Rudgwick Parish and am aware of a number of speculative planning applications trying to exploit the tilted balance. Fortunately, most of these have been thwarted by water neutrality, but apparently not for much longer. It is therefore extremely disappointing to hear that a new local plan for the district, originally planned for adoption this year, will likely now be withdrawn. Also of great concern is the fact that it wouldn't have removed the tilted balance anyway, and for some years. I actually live in the hamlet of Cox Green, with mains water supplied by Thames Water. Therefore, we have never had the protection of water neutrality, and so have experienced the high bar of the tilted balance. This has resulted in unwanted permissions that otherwise would surely have been refused. An adopted new plan with the tilted balance remaining is totally unacceptable in my view. Whilst reverting to the HDPF may now be the only feasible way forward, I'm concerned about the potential loss of affordable homes and excessive developer profits, especially on non-strategic greenfield sites. Despite the HDLP viability evidence showing that such sites can deliver at least 45% affordable housing, it will default to 35% or even to 20%. In addition, on all sites, there will be savings by not having to comply with the higher eco standards of the HDLP. Our community infrastructure levy was set in 2017 and remains very low compared to our neighbours. With a lengthy delay before any new local plan is adopted, why not undertake a SIL review to better capture these excessive profits and thereby fund more infrastructure? Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much, and you're welcome to stay. Thank you. Before we take questions, councillors have already contacted me with a few points, so I'd like to just raise a couple of things first. I think we've actually maybe touched on some of those issues already. One of the questions was, are we at risk when producing a local plan and it not being adopted by the unitary authority after government reorganisation? And what if the plan was not approved in time when the new unitaries take over? It is understood that the government has the new 30-month plan time frame. What governance and assurance processes will be employed by HDC to ensure we meet that time frame? I mean, after discussing it with our cabinet member yesterday, I understand that the new authority really should keep the plan alive. Perhaps you'd like to comment on that. Thank you.
Yes, happy to do so. So really the first points around, well, the first 2 points really around risk and what happens if it's not approved in time. Yes, there is a risk. I think that with the best will in the world, if we were to start a local plan review now, obviously the timescale for devolution and the 30-month timetable, we know they don't align. What we do know is that the government have said that there is an expectation that they can be carried forward under the new unitary authorities. And we would have to, make sure that, I think, as part of the plan preparation process, certainly at some point we will know which authorities we're being aligned with, and obviously we've got the sort of wider duty to cooperate or joint working that we do anyway. So I think that's something that we would be picking up as part of that process, which I think would help to minimise some of that risk. I think the other point you were talking about in terms of governance and assurance processes under the new local plan regime, actually one of the first phases is that there's something called a project initiation document that's required by the sort of first step in terms of the sort of 3 stages that that PINS would expect you to go through. And obviously we do the project planning anyway, but I think that's one way perhaps of formalising it and making it absolutely crystal clear, how we're doing it and what the risks are.
Can you speak up, Catherine, because we can't hear you.
Which bit have you missed? All of it? Okay, so 2 points around risk, essentially sort of to some extent covered in my presentation. That was just really the risk is that we know that the plan, if we start it now, won't be finished before we become somewhere else, some other authority. That said, as part of the transitional arrangements, the government have picked up that's a risk and an issue, and are saying that it will be able to be carried forward. Having said that, we can't get rid of all of those problems, but we would be working jointly with our new partners to be and do so in any event as part of joint working anyway. So that to some extent mitigates that risk. The other point, my microphone seems to be cutting in and out, which might be part of the problem. The other point was around government assurances. We have to do with the new planning system something called a project initiation document. Obviously, we've got project management anyway, but it formalises that process and I think makes it sort of publicly clear what those risks are. And around what I don't yet know is what the government expectations are in terms of what that should look like. But obviously, we do it anyway and can make it fit.
Thank you, Catherine. Would anybody else from the committee like to discuss those points that we just raised about the timing with the unitary authorities? No. Okay, thank you very much. Another question came into me about will there be any questions raised about the process, the logic, sort of the weight given by the inspectors to decisions. Have you got any thoughts on this? the weight given to the decisions made by the inspector. So basically, will a complaint perhaps be raised about the process followed by the inspector?
Sorry, Chair, I'm not sure I'm complete. Could you just tell me the question
Sorry.
again? I'm sure I'm really grasping.
No, that's all
the
right.
point.
So will there be a complaint raised about the process, the logic made by the inspector?
Apologies, you were perfectly clear. I just didn't hear the word complaint, so I thought that was the issue. We have submitted a freedom of information request to get as much background information as we can in terms of the decision-making process. Based on our analysis of that, that will influence the content of a complaints letter. So yes, I fully anticipate there'll be a complaint letter, but the precise content on it will be influenced by the response that we get from the planning inspectorate.
Thank you. Any committee members wish to discuss that point? Councillor Clark.
Yeah, I did have a sort of a question, which was looking at the complaint where you went. If I look at your point 1.16, where we addressed the concerns that we had, and you've sent off a letter to the inspectorate, have we had a reply from them yet? Because when I look at the Mid Sussex complaints, it seems to take a month for the inspectorate to come back against the complaints from Mid Sussex. So have we had a reply as yet?
So there were two sort of bites of the cherry that we've had up till now. The first one was actually before we received the inspector's initial findings, really, which was sent to sort of PINS more generally and outlining some of our concerns with the process. We did receive a response from that, albeit I couldn't tell you exactly what the timescales were now. But at that stage, that's when we knew that the local plan had been referred up to the MHCLG. They didn't actually respond in any way to the points that we had actually specifically raised about the inspector's conduct. Subsequent to that, we've obviously raised concerns sort of publicly, but what we're intending to do is obviously as part of this FOI process is to sort of delve into that background more clearly and then sort of follow that up with a more formal complaint, which I think would be more helpful.
Any other members? Any non-members of the committee like to discuss that point? So others have raised questions. Perhaps I think we've talked about that already in the presentation about the gate review timings. Questions have been raised about the cost of the process so far, but teasing that out I'm sure is going to be next to impossible. And in future reporting back to scrutiny on a regular basis, and also communication strategies. But I think it'd be best now to open up questions to members of the committee if they've got any questions to for the team here to address for you about the local plan. Councillor Utan.
Yes, thank you. I've got two questions. Firstly, the components of evidence base may become out of date. What sort of timescale is it being given, or are they being given to be valid for the next plan? If you see what I mean, you're looking quite blank. Louis.
No, that's fine. Sorry, I was just making a note of your question, Tricia. We have a number of strands of evidence base, and the speed at which they go out of date, it's not a one-size-fits-all answer, really. So some things, you know, for example, we've got a landscape character assessment, which was done in 2003, and I would say that probably will never go out of date because landscape changes on, you know, thousands of years in terms of, you know, what that looks like. But equally, there are other bits of evidence. So, for example, an employment evidence base, for example, that's done periodically, probably would need doing sooner rather than later. What I would say is, in terms of our, we've got a site assessment document that looks at potential development sites. You know, our officer assessment as to, you know, the suitability or otherwise of those sites. That's probably something that will remain valid, certainly for the sort of not, you know, for the current period.
Okay, thank you. My second question is, there's going to be gateway timings going forward. With whom? Who are going to conduct the gateway?
Our understanding is that is with the planning inspectorate.
Oh.
What I don't know that they've necessarily got yet is in how that's going to be resourced, how that will look like. Obviously, that will come through the planning regulations. So, you know, your guess is as good as mine as to exactly how that's going to work at the moment.
Councillor Vickers, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Clearly, we're in a very difficult position, and as was said by one of the members of the public, this is probably the least bad option that we need to take. It's going to take 30 months-ish to get a new plan ready. How far back do we have to go in the whole plan process? The inspector did say that a number of policies were good and sound, so we don't have to redo everything, but there's obviously the housing number is the biggest issue, because the standard method number has gone up significantly, and when you add on 20%, it's almost double to what we were hoping to provide. And part of my concern going forward is speculative development will be coming forward in the meantime, and it's getting harder and harder to resist because we haven't got a 5-year land supply. And even with neighbourhood plans which are in date, and I think you probably understand why I'm saying this, the inspectors are not taking a huge amount of notice of those. So I just wonder if you could comment on those few points, please.
I will start. If I've forgotten anything, come back to me at the end. Yeah, you're right. I think it very much, I think, feels like a least worst option. In terms of how far back do we have to go, if the plan is withdrawn, it's withdrawn and we have to start again. That said, there are obviously bits of the evidence base which we've touched on that you can rely on, but you're quite right in terms of the increased housing numbers, you know, and what the implications for that are. And I sort of, to some extent, touched on it in the presentation. And, you know, what does that mean for infrastructure provision, things like schools, roads? You know, we would need to understand what that looks like, and indeed some of the other things around, you know, actually, is it practicable to deliver that in terms of the market as well? So I think there's a lot of things to look at, you know, what that looks like through the 30-month timescale and what the government's expectations are. I don't really know, because obviously the legislation isn't out there, and what, you know, therefore that's a hard point to comment on, simply because I don't have that in front of me. But obviously, as things go forward, that's something we'll definitely be advising members of. And yes, I understand the point about speculative development in the meantime. Certainly, we're aware that there are cases where, you know, inspectors have looked at what our 5-year supply is and looked at the regulation in the paragraph 14. It's not, you know, to some extent that paragraph is there, and you know, the conclusions that they've reached is not something we necessarily agree with, but something I think we need to work with parishes on going forward, and something, you know, obviously we're lucky in our team that we have a senior neighbourhood planning officer to assist with that process.
Can I come back, Chairman?
Yes, of course.
Yes, my concern is about neighbourhood plans, which are, a lot of them are going to be out of date in a year's time. How will the process for them to update those neighbourhood plans fit in with the revision of the local plan?
I see. Yes, sorry. I think, you know, we are where we are in terms of if the plan is withdrawn. I think what we would need to do is to have the conversations with the parishes first about what their own aspirations are, because every parish is different. But I don't think we're in the same situation as previously, where we were saying, you know, look, let's wait and see what, you know, obviously they've prepared their plan based on the current HDPF. It seemed a bit nonsensical to then, you know, start another one until they knew what the new framework was. But obviously, if we've got a long period where actually they would have to wait, you know, at least 30 months, I think there is something that they would need to do in the meantime, and that's something we would definitely work with them on.
Thank you. And just one other point. You said, yes, we've practically got to go back and start again. We're not going back to Regulation 18 or the equivalent call for sites, because we know what sites are available and deliverable. So presumably we just need to look at how we're going to increase that housing allocation.
I think we would need to do a call for sites because we would have to be showing that there is no stone unturned and, you know, theoretically other sites may become available that we're not aware of. I think there's also, just from an officer perspective, on our database, it's quite old now, and I think there's an opportunity to update it and make sure it's completely fit for purpose, and, you know, are the boundaries correct and all the rest of it. Those do change over time, so there would be a process to go through, but you're right, so at the moment the evidence base we would have to look again, I think, as part of that process. I don't think we could just completely keep it, but in the meantime it's not out of date.
Councillor Trollope.
Thank you, Chair. What's stopping us other than perhaps money? And if it is money, I'd be interested in what the cost is of gathering the various evidences that we know we're going to need either within our own authority or in the new authority. I mean, eventually we're going to need up-to-date data to formulate a plan because we don't have one now. And if we need up-to-date data, then why not just start gathering it?
I was going to say, I think that's what we're saying we will be doing. It's not saying we're not doing it. I can't give you a cost off the top of my head. It's something we need to go away and do based on other, you know, what the historical situation has been. And obviously there would be an uplift in terms of, you know, with some years on. But yeah, there's no expectation that we wouldn't do that. Obviously, some bits of evidence, so employment is a case in point, can go out of date very quickly. So you've got to be a bit careful about how you time it and when you time it. But in summary, no, we're not going to not do it.
Okay, thank you. That just wasn't clear to me. So thank you for clarifying.
Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Chair. My question has got a few points in it, so I'll break it down. But if I can finish the point and then maybe officers can address that in one go, that'd be great. I noticed on the report, page 22, paragraph 8.6 states that legislation allows for the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government to direct that a local plan should proceed to adoption. In the report, it also highlights and states that that course of action is considered academic because of the inspector having, the Secretary of State having the initial findings of the inspector on his desk for the 6 weeks period. However, it's my understanding that a meeting took place between the Chief Executive and the Secretary of State recently, which I presume the local plan was the main point of discussion. And my understanding is that that meeting was held prior to the all-member briefing that took place last week, although that meeting with Matthew Pettycook wasn't mentioned during that update. I'm not sure why, but perhaps I can provide an explanation, and maybe if the local plan was discussed, what elements of it were discussed potentially. But having studied the legislation around this, my interpretation and understanding of this is that the option is available to the local authority to write to the Secretary of State to request that the local plan be called in should the authority deem it appropriate. For clarity, I'm referring to section 21 and 21A of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004, which sets out the powers of the Secretary of State for the local plan intervention. And what I'll do is I will read out verbatim the section which states to support my argument. So under section 21, section 4, it states that at any time before a development plan document is adopted by a local planning authority, the Secretary of State may direct that the document or any part of it is submitted to him for his approval. Section 21, section 5, paragraph C then advises that if direction is given after the authority has submitted a document, but before the person appointed to carry out the inspection, i.e. the inspector, has made his recommendations, and is not withdrawn before those recommendations are made, i.e. the inspector's final report, that the person must make his recommendations to the Secretary of State. So my understanding and interpretation of those passages is to really put it simply, that the Secretary of State can decide whether to accept a call-in on either in the plan in full or parts of that plan. However, wider parts of that legislation would also suggest that the onus would be on the council or the local authority to make that call-in and officially write into the Secretary of State to request that call-in. And then that could be done if it felt necessary before the inspector's final report is published. So that brings me to my main point, really, which is, has the council formally written to the Secretary of State at any point requesting a call-in? And if not, why not? And if so, what is officers' interpretation of that legislation, because my understanding of that, I've just read out my understanding of what I think that legislation is, but officers may have a different viewpoint on it. So that would be really helpful to understand that, because as Councillor Vickers had just explained in her contribution, that speculative applications are coming in across the board, and particularly, you know, we're both councillors for Southall to South and North respectively, and you know, a case in point recently has been that Horsham and Golf and Fitness application, where you have, we've just talked about the MPPF, for example, giving weight to neighbourhood plans. Well, the Southall to neighbourhood plan is still a valid legally sound document, and the inspector took a sledgehammer to it. So what I want to make sure is that we really have exhausted all options before we actually do withdraw this plan. Because if withdrawing the plan is the right option, I'm happy. You know, and we have exhausted all our options, then that's what we've got to do. But I just really want to make sure, because we're going to be facing a lot of these speculative applications and large applications, which we're not going to have any little to no influence over. Just want to make sure we have actually exhausted our options that are available to us. And I appreciate I was going on there, but thank you for listening. I hope you've got all that down. Thank you.
Councillor Jeffrey, I think Catherine's going to respond to that.
Yes, I'll start that off. There's 2 points to your question, so I'll cover the first one, which was around the ministerial meeting, which was held last week. So that was a meeting that was it was a task force meeting that was on water neutrality. It was wider than water neutrality, but that was the issue that Jane Eaton was invited to attend, and the invite came from Emma Hardy, who is the Secretary of State for Water and Flooding, or Under Secretary rather. The matters relating to the impact of the planning inspector's decision in relation to water neutrality came up and were briefly discussed as part of that meeting, but that was the focus of the meeting, and not anything more than the sort of the facts that we're looking about around the issues to withdraw. And as I understand it, Jane Eaton was invited to leave the meeting before it concluded, and she had no personal conversation with Minister Pennycook. So that's the first issue. In terms of your points around the call-in, so I think it's important to understand that actually there is a distinction between a call-in, which you can do with a planning application. So there is a process in which you can ask for a planning application to be called in and considered by the Secretary of State. There is a difference in terms of the local plan legislation. So what the Secretary of State or the Minister can do is to direct an inspector to undertake certain actions. But what he cannot do is to direct what the decision might be. And therefore, ultimately, you know, that really does narrow the options that we have got. So in terms of the point around actually, you know, exhausting all options, the better option, if we were going to go down that route, would actually be to have a sort of last roll of the dice in terms of actually writing to the planning inspectorate rather than actually the Secretary of State, because actually his abilities to intervene are actually relatively limited. I hope that helps.
Councillor Jeffrey, does that answer your question?
I assume it does. It does in part. Yes. So I suppose if I was to follow up on it, I would probably ask. So, was it ever considered to write to the Secretary of State? So I'm assuming by that we didn't write to the Secretary of State at all to ask for a call in. But was it? I take it, was it a consideration that we did look at, or was it not? Thank you.
So the answer to the question is no, we haven't formally written to the Secretary of State. And one of the reasons for that is because the decision sat on his desk for, you know, some weeks, some 6 weeks or so. We know that he was absolutely aware of the Horsham situation, and with that amount of consideration, we were assuming that if he decided to call it in, that he would have taken the opportunity to do that, having had a substantial amount of time to consider it. So no, we haven't formally written. I think the question that you posed about, you didn't quite, I don't know if you quite used this phrase, but have we you know, looked underneath every stone? Have we left no stone unturned? Have we done absolutely everything possible? You know, there is always the opportunity, isn't there, to ask one last time. So, you know, we could write to the planning inspectorate I think particularly in the light of the point that Catherine was when she was summarising the emerging legislation that's coming through. So allegedly the new regulations are coming this autumn. That's not that far away now. And the duty to cooperate is going to be taken away, isn't it? And this new alignment, which we don't know what that's going to comprise. But bearing in mind that the issue with Horsham was duty to cooperate, something which will disappear in the coming weeks, possibly there is the opportunity, there is the opportunity to write again, if members were minded to want us to do so, to write again to the planning inspectorate, setting out our stall again about, because we do firmly believe that our plan was a good one, and asking for them to consider the position, particularly in the light of the changing rules which are imminent, which actually sweeps away the very test that our plan was judged to fail, which obviously we disagree with, but nevertheless that was the inspector's consideration. So that could be, in the answer to your question of have you done absolutely everything, that could possibly be something else we could do.
Thank you. That was quite a large topic. So before I move on to Councillor Clark, have any non-members got any comments on that? Councillor Buffy.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for allowing me to come in. I think, in terms of the question around writing to the Minister for calling, we've already just worked out that that's not how the system works, so we can't do that. I think the other point is that even if there was some mechanism with which to do that, essentially this letter that came from the inspector, which is not actually a decision, it is a recommendation to us for what step we should take, that sat on the Minister's desk, the Minister of State's desk, for quite some time, and it did not go out without him being comfortable that it would go out. So essentially, it's not a decision, but even if it were a decision, we would be asking the Minister to call in his own decision. So it's, when you look at the different steps, it kind of makes sense. So, and I suppose the very short answer to that is, yes, we did think about it, and that's where we got to. However, I think we're all of a mind, we may not all agree on everything, but I think we're all of a mind to know that the best possible outcome would be for a plan to go through and be made at this point. It is far better for us to have a new plan made than undergo a 30-month period without one. And I would like it very much as well if the ministry and the government would realise, and the planning inspectorate for that matter, would realise that actually their goal in all of this, their goal is to get development going and get housing built and delivered. And actually the course where they're steering us at the moment is leading to a situation where that is less likely to happen rather than more likely to happen. It's not going to, in the immediate term, open the floodgates. It's going to gum the system up even further. So bearing that in mind, I'm not a proud person, and I would do anything for people around here. So if there is still a stone that can be unturned, and still a step that can be taken to try and urge the inspector to look at this again and consider it in the round, I would be fully supportive of doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buffy. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got 5 questions and sort of one comment. The first one I actually wasn't going to bother with, but I thought I'll ask it anyway, in view of what the Director of Place made as a comment. Troubling is the lag in time between the him walking out of the in December and getting an answer in March. It's interesting to see Mid Sussex was treated in the same poor way, and it's very suspicious that Pennycook wrote a letter basically saying reject any plan that's delayed that would require more than 6 months work on it and then it sits on his desk for about 3 months. So, you know, it smells a bit like a rat. But for me, the question is, a duty to cooperate. Two inspectors in Crawley, two inspectors in Chichester found that duty to cooperate was fine with Horsham. Now, I'm a scientist by training. Ipso facto, if a DTT was good for Chichester and Crawley, and presumably Mid Sussex, I'm not sure, in what way would it not be good the other way round? It's probably an unfair question, but maybe you can enlighten me a bit, because you have more experience as inspectors than I do. So that's my first question.
Thanks for that, Paul. Councillor Clark. The distinction there, I think, is that what the inspector was looking at in our case is that he was saying that we didn't. There were other sites that had come forward to us as part of our local plan preparation process. Other, you know, sites that we hadn't allocated in the plan that were saying that they had solutions to water neutrality. Now, from a professional point of view, we had gone through that and had ruled them out for other reasons. His view is that we should have gone back and spoken to Chichester, Crawley, whomever about that. So in that sense, that would be where the failure lay, because it was representations made to us about sites within our district rather than it being the solution as to how we were going to solve water neutrality in terms of the sort of the practicalities or in relation to their plans. It's an extraordinarily narrow conclusion to have reached, and you know, I've said this sort of colloquially to colleagues. You know, there were some weeks, you know, in the thick of sort of the water neutrality issues where I spent more time probably speaking to colleagues at Crawley and Chichester than I perhaps did with some of my own team members. It was that some of the issues were that complex, and therefore I think that some of those conversations were so embedded that actually, you know, they knew all about those sites, and therefore there wasn't necessarily the need to take that back and document it in the way that the inspector was requiring. I think is if that helps sort of provide some distinction.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, at least there's something there that we can be using on a further argument, even though it is probably not a battle worth having. The second question is one that does concern me. You've described a scene of extreme uncertainty in the legislation and in the I hesitate to even use the word guidelines or whatever it is that the government is dreaming up, and legislation. At what point, when we're working on a new plan, does basically, in terms of the plan, does that stop, and therefore you start operating in a structured world rather than a chaotic one that we seem to be in at the moment? Because it must make the planning of the new plan very difficult to know what to nail down and what not to nail down. I just wondered if you got a view on that.
It is a complex situation, and something that we're grappling with as officers, quite frankly, in terms of, you know, if we haven't got the legislation, if we haven't got the guidance, you know, you're kind of operating in the dark, quite frankly. Therefore, I think, you know, the pragmatic solution is, well, what do we definitely know that we're going to need? We know we're going to be having to be pushed on housing sites and locations, so we can certainly look at some of the basics around that in terms of, you know, where are they going to come from, you know, what do we think about them? That's unlikely to have changed. So I think there's definitely things we can do, and we've got certainty of, I think we can do an audit of our evidence base and look at, you know, what's out of date. And I think pragmatically as well, there's an argument to be looking at corporately, you know, evidence base that we collect. It's not necessarily just of use to ourselves in planning. It might have benefits more corporately in terms of projects that are ongoing elsewhere. So there's conversations I think that we should be having with some of my colleagues elsewhere in the council to see whether there are any other benefits or synergies so that we're able to be as effective as we possibly can more widely as well.
Thank you, that's helpful. I can't remember the acronym for the new document, so I just called it at the moment SD Doc. Can't remember what the rest of it was. SD Pan, was it? Okay. Looking at SD Pan, the one thing that does concern me is in the what we were looking at was in the large strategic sites, we were looking to attach G&T sites to the large strategic sites. When I look at the SD PAN, apart from a list of Gypsy and Traveller sites that were in consideration in the original plan, there's no actually mention of what we can do as guidance to deal with Gypsy and Traveller sites, which frankly are a plague in rural settings. It doesn't affect the town, but it does affect rural areas like mine. Have any consideration been given to that?
May ask my colleagues to come in here if there's anything to add. I think the issue, obviously, as you're right, the local plan that's currently at examination looked to allocate Gypsy and Traveller sites as part of strategic allocations. With the withdrawal of a plan, obviously that's not set in policy, and becomes something that we would obviously still want to encourage. Maybe it's something we can, if it's not already in the plan, but it becomes more of a challenge to encourage, I think. But I'll pass it to my colleague.
I just wanted to establish it in this guidance that we're looking at, that it's something that should be covered.
No, it's a good point, Councillor. And I don't know if you've got the SD PAN before you, but paragraph 5.7, we do want to encourage proposals on sites identified in the local plan, which includes strategic sites, or in which accord with the site-specific matters identified in it. So you'll see that last paragraph. So that would include particular, I suppose, I'm hesitant to call them requirements because if the plan is withdrawn, but what the withdrawn local plan wanted to require. So although we don't specifically say in that paragraph Gypsy and Traveller sites, it could mean the whole gambit of requirements that we wish to accommodate on the site, which would include pictures on strategic sites. I can see I've confused you, Councillor. Should I have another go?
Because the listing I've got there as Appendix 5 is basically individual sites that I know for the past 10 years have been figuring on various documents, but it doesn't refer to anything bigger. So you've got little itsy bitsy bits, but you haven't got, the sort of 10 to 15, or maybe you've confused me.
I think I have confused you, so, which is not ideal. But we do identify in the appendix, or one of the appendixes, strategic site allocations, and there were requirements for each strategic allocations to bring forward Gypsy and Traveller pictures.
Okay, thank you. The penny took a while to drop, but it got there in the end.
It's about the accent as well.
Fourth question. Catherine, you put up a chart showing about neighbourhood plans and possible impact.
Sorry, Councillor Clark, before we go on to the next question, can I just give Councillor Boffey a chance to respond to an earlier question you had?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Councillor Clark, as well. It was just on the previous one, and it also gave me an opportunity to come in on something I wanted to mention based on earlier in the presentation. Around the uncertainty of the new regulations, when we talk about law, legislation, regulations, guidance. Catherine can correct me in a moment if I'm wrong in this, but my understanding is that the legislation is there and that's done. What we're awaiting is the regulations to enable us to move forward. And also, so there's the uncertainty, and there's also the question, we had the point earlier around, 30 months and getting it done before, the new local, the reorganisation. And I appreciate the point where, we can all sort of say it's a sensible position to take. We're not going to get it done before the reorganisation. I'm a bit of an optimist, so I'd say I wouldn't want to give up completely on completing a new plan by March 2028. It's extremely challenging to do, but we would give it our best shot. However, this is not aided by the delays to the new regulations coming out. It is galling, to say the least, that the government is strongly urging authorities like ours to, quote, get on with making a new local plan, and yet seems unable to provide us with a regulatory framework with which to do it.
Thank you.
Can I continue?
The next question.
In fact, before I go on with my fourth question, I would add to Councillor Boffey's assertion. I don't think it would be desirable. I think it must be done by March 28. Not would be nice. Must, underline, be done. But I'm sure officers will do the best that they can to make that happen. And we as councillors need to help you do that. Question 4. You put up a chart on neighbourhood plans. This is one of my pet subjects, as you know. My problem is, how are we going to tackle the updating or the reviewing of neighbourhood plans when this government has withdrawn the funding for the neighbourhood plans? So basically, I think we need to consider how to help the parish councils financially, possibly, or finding funding for it. I mean, have officers thought about this as yet? If the answer is no, that's fine, but I think we need to think about it. Because we've already seen what's happened with the Southwater neighbourhood plan. There's 4 more neighbourhood plans coming up for referendum any minute now. But there's a lot of other neighbourhood plans out there that are out of date, and it's something we need to think about, guys.
I completely agree. We have started to think about, I mean, what I would say is that the notice, or there was no notice that the funding was going to be withdrawn. So it's not something that we had any advance knowledge of, and therefore have not been in a position to immediately advise parishes or even know where to turn ourselves. It's something we have begun to think about whether there are any other ways around that, but very formative. So it's not something I can sort of respond formally to here. Equally, I think there are maybe things that we can do in terms of providing advice to parishes in terms of, let's face it, the council's own funds are limited. So if that's something that parishes want to do, it's, how can we advise them on what things may cost? How can they approach consultants? What are good ways of doing things cost effectively? So I think there's pragmatism and practicalities around that as well. But something I think we definitely need to pick up over the course of this summer.
If I can go back on that, please, Chairman. As Chairman of Finance for a Parish Council, I think we need to do this by September, because the budgetary cycle starts in, let's say, middle of September, early October. So I think for parishes, at least for mine, as Chairman of Finance, I would like to know what advice you can provide by, let's say, the 1st of October, because that would be useful in the planning cycle for a parish council, I would argue.
Certainly.
Question 5 actually was generated by Mr. Kornicki. We've heard about HDT, and the question was raised but sort of left dangling. But I'd like to ask officers, and I suspect the answer is, well, I know what the answer is, but what can we do to mitigate the HDT issues going forward whilst we're working on the plan? Is there anything practical that we can do? And then I have a comment afterwards.
So just for everyone's benefit in the room, because it's yet another planning acronym, HDT is the housing delivery test. So what that is, you've probably heard of the 5-year land supply, a lot of you, and if anyone watching at home as well, which obviously looks at the 5 years hence and what we're looking to deliver against the government's housing targets and where that might come from. What the housing delivery test does, just in sort of a very high level, is to say, well, those were your targets for that year. How much of that did you manage to build? Obviously, we didn't manage to build it ourselves because that's something that developers do. If you're then below certain percentages of that target, then different things kick in. The presumption in favour of development kicks in at below 75%. The issue we have got, I think, going forwards is that, irrespective of where we now find ourselves, this year our target jumped up to 1338. That's what we're going to be tested against for this year when it comes to the delivery test. Obviously, we're still in a position where we haven't got a local plan because of the delays. So in the very short term, we need to be looking pragmatically at planning applications as they come forward. However, I think the caution I would give is, if there are things like outline, we still don't, we're the ones that don't build it. So although we can do everything we can, and certainly, I know that Emma Parks, head of Development and Building Control, is obviously working very hard on that side of things as well. To some extent, we don't hold all the cards.
Thank you. And just one final comment. I mean, you raised the issue about gateways, gateways to, that didn't work very well for us, is my comment.
I said that in my presentation as well. I think the only other thing I would add in terms of some of the comments you've made about the 30 months and getting that, absolutely, we'll do everything we can in our gift. Some of the, what we need to be pushing back to pins on is obviously they need to be well resourced to be able to pick up us and every other authority that will have to go through this process, and so that we're not left hanging, so that we can hit those deadlines, because that side of it, again, isn't within our gift.
Thank you, Chairman, for your patience. Thank you, officers.
Thank you for your questions. Councillor Olsen.
Thank you. I don't want to jump ahead of any committee members if they have questions, but I do want to thank Councillor Clark because he brought up two of the points I wanted to raise, and I think, just to clarify, I understand that the SD PAN for someone with a ward with one of the site allocations within Horsham Town that has quite a lot of suggestions, shall we say, from the local plan, that those are going to hopefully carry some influence to developers. So thanks for clarifying that. Just back to when the Director of Place had mentioned this one last letter or opportunity, that was intriguing, and she's touched upon it again. But she said if members were minded to. So my question is, when you say members, are you referring to Cabinet or to this body? Because Cabinet is otherwise meant to make the formal decision to withdraw in 2 weeks' time. We've noted that things like to sit on the Minister's desk for 3 months. So I'm confused whether there's an opportunity to actually take that opportunity, and if there's any chance of getting a response in time. That's my first question.
Chair, if I could just quickly clarify that I was referring to members of the Scrutiny Committee, but I'll let the Chairman answer.
I was going to mention this a little bit later after more of a debate, but since it's been brought up again, and off the back of Councillor Boffey's optimism and Councillor Jeffrey's comment about leaving no stone unturned, I wonder what the appetite would be for members of the Policy and Scrutiny Committee to ask or recommend one final time that the officers write to the Planning Inspectorate to consider the local plan again, given the imminent changing rules with respect to duty to cooperate.
Can I?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm saying yes, but I have a question. But
if we were to do that, we'd obviously need to propose a seconder and vote on it. But
I'm happy to propose. My question is more like, what exactly will we say? I mean, how will you phrase it?
Well, we have very, very good officers here. I think would put forward a letter, and we'd probably ask that to be done prior to consideration on Cabinet on the 6th of August. Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, on this mooted letter, we were talking about stones and being unturned and all these kind of things. So please help me, I just want to understand something. So at the moment, the issues that we have here is around the duty to cooperate, which first of all, we refute it. But secondly, that issue is going to go away with new regulation or new guidance in about a month or something like that. That leaves then, if I'm correct and if I understand right, so please help me, that the only concerns that exist then that would provide with the inspector to refuse the local plan is a list of concerns about soundness of other matters that he doesn't define. So the only thing then is some accusations or some issues, but they are undefined. Is that correct? Have I understand that right? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So just to be clear, obviously the local plan is being examined under the current planning system, and the inspector would have to do that. But I think it's worth one last chance of writing to the Planning Inspectorate identifying this sort of the changing goalposts, the fact that we could hopefully provide some further assurance to him to help him in his decision as to whether we have met the duty to cooperate, which obviously we feel that we have. There may well be other things that he would want us to address, but the point of the letter would just be simply to ask whether there was another opportunity for him to open the examination. So one last ask as to whether we could actually go through the examination. There may well be other issues and he may well find the plan unsound, but my suggestion was an opportunity just to ask on one last occasion.
With Cabinet coming up on the 6th of August, what happens if we don't get a response by then?
I would suggest that we would impress upon the Planning Inspectorate that we would need a timely response, even if they're not able to say yes or no, to give us an indication of timescale, and then that would be for the leader of the council to make a decision as to whether he wanted to postpone his cabinet meeting.
Councillor Brooks, I think you're next.
Thank you very much, Chair. In light of what both the officers have said about it being members of this body that could propose and agree an instruction to officers to write to the planning inspector as has been discussed, I am minded to put forward such proposal, but I would be grateful if it was within your discretion to do so, to allow a brief pause in the meeting to discuss the wording of that with officers and to make sure that appropriate wording could be formulated so that it could be proposed in an adequate way to be properly considered by the rest of the committee. Is that a reasonable request?
That definitely sounds a reasonable request. I'd like to get some more debate on it before then we put forward.
I'm most happy for people to have a full sense of debate and for you as chair to, at your discretion, direct when the most appropriate moment for that to happen is.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. Councillor Lambert.
Thank you, Chair. I'm fully in favour of us sending this letter. I think we should send it as soon as possible, and I think we should start work on everything else as soon as possible. And as I said previously, I would like to propose that we send the letter and we send it PDQ. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Being a cautious person by nature, before jumping into a pond, I generally try and ascertain how deep the water is. I hear what the officers say about recommendation about going ahead with this letter. The issue, as I understood it, was there were other risks that might undermine our work and our policies that we are concerned about. It's an impossible question to ask in a way, but I would ask the Director of Place to sort of expand a bit about the pros and cons of doing this letter in terms of the other things that might creep out of the woodwork before we jump in.
I think the purpose of the letter would just be to ascertain whether the Planning Inspectorate would even consider a further reopening the examination, and whether it warranted that, and what further information that he would want from us in order to be able to do that. So I think to answer your question, it would be one step at a time. You're absolutely right to identify that, if the inspector were to write his final report now, we do have concerns. So I think it's one step at a time. But in the light of the changing goalposts, I think the first question is, would he even consider that? And if so, I think then we would need to consider further, wouldn't we, on the balance of risks, what we wanted to go forward. But at the moment, I would recommend to you the withdrawal of the plan, as we have said, and that we start a new local plan. But I just see that there might be an opportunity just simply to ask a question at the moment. No.
Can I come back, Chairman, on that then? So basic, but depending on how prompt they are in replying to that, it doesn't preclude us starting the work anyway.
Not at all. The government are absolutely clear, aren't they, on their requirements of all local planning authorities, that they have to pursue the new local plans, local government review. It should not be a barrier to that. They're very, very clear. The Chief Planning Officer has written to all local authorities, are absolutely clear on the instructions, and we would have to do that whatever happens with the local plan, which is currently at examination. So that is a requirement that is placed upon this authority and indeed every authority.
Councillor Trollope, and then I'll go to non-members. Thank you.
Thank you. And in your view, writing this letter, would it, my understanding is that we are going to be writing a letter of complaint. I can't remember to which body, but just my understanding was that there was going to be a letter of complaint written about the way this was handled. Would this further letter strengthen or weaken or have no effect whatsoever on this outcome?
So clearly there needs to be a choreography. I'm not suggesting we write a letter of complaint and then say, could you help us? So we'll write and say, could you consider us again? And then if the answer to that is no, we have every intention of writing a letter of complaint, but I would suggest the choreography needs to be...
I understand that. My point was more is that it would potentially strengthen and give further evidence for you to say, look, we even tried again. See what I mean? You know, just to show that, you know, we are being more than reasonable.
In the letter of complaint, absolutely, we could include that. You're right. Yes.
That was the point I was trying to make.
Thank you. Sorry, I misunderstood.
Thank you, Councillor Trollope. Is there any other members of the committee who would like to? I think the mood is that we might be before this, but before we go to getting the wording for the recommendation and propose a seconders, is there anybody else who would like to discuss that first? Okay. Councillor Fletcher, thank you.
Changing goalposts has been a constant theme of this whole affair. And obviously a letter will need to be sent very quickly in order for it to take effect before the 6th of August. But in the light of how fast things are moving, even as we speak, would it be useful for any resolution to actually leave some discretion about whether to send this letter?
Discretion to send or not to send? Sorry, there's some discussion going on here. Martin Buffy, Councillor Buffy, sorry.
I suspect that discretion is not necessarily required in terms of whether to send a letter or not, but I'm not entirely sure how these things work and what procedural rules are, but discretion may be required in terms of the scheduling of the 6th of August cabinet meeting, depending on what the response is or isn't from the inspector, because you might get a reply that says yes or no, or you might get a reply that says let me think about that and I'll get back to you. So yeah.
Thank you. So I think we would leave that open for discretion on the 6th of August, I think that's what we're saying. Thank you. Councillor Trollope.
If it's sent by email, I would just recommend a read receipt.
Good idea, thank you. Okay, any further debate before we put forward a recommendation? Okay. Councillor Brooks, were you wanting to work on some language and propose?
Yes, I just would appreciate if the chairman is happy for me to do so, to just take a moment to frame the language with the officers to make sure that it's clear and adequate, and then I'll happily put forward that as a proposal and see if I have a seconder. I think I might, if Councillor Lambert minded.
Thank you. If we have a few minutes break, then if you'd like to come forward and we can put some wording together. Thank you. Now, and it has been distributed. Councillor Brooks and Councillor Lambert have been working hard on that, so thank you very much. Councillor Brooks, would you like to read out the recommendation?
Thank you very much. I'd like to propose the following motion be adopted by the committee: to delegate authority to the Director of Place to write to the Planning Inspectorate to ask them to reconsider their position in view of the imminent changing planning regulations which will repeal the duty of care to cooperate. Sorry, the duty to cooperate, sorry. That's, so, would you like me to start again from the beginning, or is everybody okay?
I think we're okay. Thank you
Lovely.
very much.
Classic. That would be fun.
Thank you for the proposal. Councillor Lambert, are you seconding that recommendation? Thank you. Can we now have a vote on that, please? All those in favour? Nine four. Is it unanimous? Yeah. Thank you. So that recommendation is passed. Thank you very much. Okay.
She's coming back.
She's coming back, but she's
We have to. So we have one member absent at the moment. I'm just working out what we do. We're going to, sorry, there was one member absent during that recommendation. We're going to read it again, Councillor Brooks, without perhaps the reference to care, while all members are in attendance. Thank you. Councillor Brooks, your recommendation, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, for an ability to have a second bite of the cherry. I'd like to move that we adopt the following recommendation: to delegate authority to the Director of Place to write to the Planning Inspectorate to ask them to reconsider their position in view of the imminent changing planning regulations which will repeal the duty to cooperate.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lambert, you're seconding the motion. Thank you very much. We'll go to a vote now. All those in favour, please. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. So from my understanding is timings are short. The meeting with Cabinet on the 6th doesn't change. It would just provide Councillor Boffey with extra information if we've heard back from the Planning Inspectorate at that point. Thank you. Okay, agenda item number 9. Update from task and finish groups. To receive an update from the group. So I appreciate that the S106 non-financial task and finish group was actually due to meet today, but was postponed for this meeting and is now being postponed until the 18th of August. Councillor Clark, do you have anything you want to mention as chair of the committee? Thank you.
just briefly that essentially in terms of reference have been set out. We sent out an email to the parish councils, which I suspect they hadn't understood, judging from the reaction of my parish council, which I've explained in words of one syllable. And this meeting basically hijacked the slot that we were going to use. So we'll resume in on the 18th of August.
Thank you. Any comments on task and finish groups from anybody? Okay. So agenda item number 10 is the work programme, pages 60 to 64 of your pack. The table shows our work programme for this committee 25-26. In addition to the standard items, there are a few key other additions, such as the leisure and facilities contract, which will be added to the programme when the Director of Communities confirms that they're ready to be scrutinised. In September, we have also added the Vision for Horsham Town consultation on the Bishopric and Carfax to the programme. And just to note that the Crime and Disorder annual update has been moved to November to tie up with annual dates. And following our last meeting, both the neighbourhood policing team, Neil Durkin and his and the Police and Crime Commissioner, Katie Bourne, have been invited to attend. Does any committee member have any questions about our work programme? Any other councillor have comments? Thank you. Agenda item number 11 is the Cabinet Forward Plan, pages 65 to 70 of your pack. There's also a link to on the agenda. Today's meeting is in advance of the Cabinet, so our discussions will obviously be taken into consideration. Thank you for participating, and obviously we've now also got that additional letter going out, which may provide some additional information for the meeting on the 6th. Does anybody have any comments about the Cabinet Forward Plan? Any non-members? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so urgent business. We don't have any. So at what time have we got? Sorry, Councillor Lambert. Sorry.
Sorry, Chairman, just a point of order. I understood the purpose of this evening's meeting was basically for overview and scrutiny to vote and give the go-ahead for Cabinet to withdraw the plan.
That's what the recommendation says.
That's what the recommendation.
It was to consider
Yeah.
the draft report. The recommendations will be reviewed and approved by Cabinet.
Yes, yes. But we've had a discussion, but we voted on the letter, but we haven't voted to agree the recommendation for Cabinet to...
I believe that voting is just for Cabinet. Recommendations were mentioned there on page 11 of the report.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we were receiving the report from the officers. Thank you. So as we have no urgent business, I'd like to close the meeting at 19:25, and I hope that you all have a safe journey home. Thank you very much. Thank you.